Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? Someone can just give me a thumbs up. Let me know you can hear me all right as we get started. Anybody? Just put a little message in the chat box so I know you can hear me okay. There we go. All right. Just wanted to make sure. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. We'll go ahead and we'll join palms as we get started. And you can repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I'm keeping the palms joined. And you can put the palms down. So good evening all. Thanks for joining us here at our Intro to Buddhism and Meditation class. For me, I guess you kind of get used to doing this online, although I definitely still prefer being in person. But after 9 months now, you kind of just get used to this. But when it is done and we sit together in person, I'll definitely be happy about that. Plus, now the only person I stare at is myself as I talk into the screen. So it's actually been kind of an interesting meditative experience and practice to lead meditation, Dharma talks, and respond to questions looking at myself as if I was looking at everybody else. Years ago, somebody shared they were in a meditation hall and they were doing a bit of a retreat, and afterwards they said they looked around the room and everybody they saw was the Buddha. And I thought that was really beautiful, because the idea is that Buddha nature, bodhicitta, the awakened mind, is within all of us, that we are no different than the Buddha himself. He was just a person as we are. And he figured out how to end his suffering as we are working on. So to recognize the Buddha within yourself and within everyone else is really a beautiful practice. People think about the ways they treat or would treat certain people if they met them. I don't know, pick people that you have tremendous amount of respect for and admiration for or appreciation for. Let's just say you're this crazy diehard Buddhist person and you get to meet someone like the Dalai Lama and how polite and respectful and all of those things you would be towards him. Now, imagine being that way in all of our thoughts and words and actions towards everybody else. So when you meet people, if you can treat them no differently than you would treat, say, a Dalai Lama, or, like I said, anyone else for that matter that you have that much respect and appreciation for, if you can treat all people that way, including yourself, I think that's a beautiful practice. But since we all fail miserably at this, that's why we sit here on a Tuesday night at 7:00, so we can be reminded that we should treat people that way, regardless of how they treat us. So often I like to start with a question. We'll do a quick one, hopefully. How are you at treating people you don't like? Simple question. If you're joining us for the first time or you're new on YouTube, there's a chat box there on your screen. Feel free to type in your response. Can be as short or as long as you'd like. The simple question of how are you at treating people you don't like? Go ahead and type it in here. How are you at treating people you don't like? It's a challenging question because, and I see the first response here, I usually avoid them. That's exactly what I was going to say. Is that very often when we see or engage with people that we don't like, we try to avoid them. And, in some ways or some levels, that's possibly a healthy thing to do. Obviously, it depends on each situation. We don't want to put ourselves in unsafe or harmful, interactions with people. But we don't always have the opportunity to avoid them. Sometimes we're stuck with them. So when you engage with people that you don't like, if you can't avoid them, then what? How do you respond? In my mind, not so well. In person, much better. Yeah, it's kind of that idea that, we know what we think, but sometimes we're forced to respond maybe a little bit differently. And back to the avoidance, I do think that there are times where it is best and healthy to avoid them. Again, each situation is unique in its own way, but avoidance sometimes can be a very wise choice. Interesting, because some of the people I used to like, I don't like so much anymore, but trying to remember why I liked them in the first place. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, as we change, as we evolve, as we, I think, cultivate a practice of loving kindness and compassion and wisdom, this changes us, and it changes who we spend time with. It changes how we view people. It changes how we view ourselves. It changes how we interact with the world. And it definitely may change the people that we like or dislike or spend time with. So I think having that opportunity to reflect on what did I like about them in the past is important. Avoid confrontation, so I'm nice. Yeah, again, the same thing. At times, yes, I can understand, and it makes sense to me to avoid. But sometimes we have to confront it. And how are we when we do? Is the question. Anybody else response on how we are at treating people we don't like before we start the meditation? I always just like to give a little time for everyone to settle in. Sometimes when I have a really hard time with someone, I try to put myself in their shoes and understand where they come from. Yeah, definitely. That's a beautiful practice of really compassion and deep understanding of knowing that we've been in pain, we've suffered, and we've done harmful things. So when we engage with others who are really challenging us or pushing our buttons, it does help, I think, to try to understand where they're coming from. And even if we don't agree with it or we don't like it, if we can empathize with them a bit, it, I think, definitely can change the way we respond and interact with them. And not easy, of course, but none of this is. So anything else before we sit? All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with the meditation practice. There's a couple things I'll tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You won't float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. You won't figure anything out whatsoever. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is it working or not working? Am I doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. You'll hear sound inside, sounds outside, wherever you are. This is life. Life is filled with chaos, and this practice of meditation is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. So most important, don't expect anything. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, it helps. Slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Allows the back to straighten. Shoulders relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap. Just keeping the spine straight. I'll suggest closing the eyes if comfortable, or slightly open, whatever works for you. Mouth will be open or closed. I will guide us as we begin, and we will settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, again, don't expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. I will guide us as we begin. We'll settle into some silence and go from there. And again, starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And eventually, just settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. And throughout the practice, you'll hear sounds. These are not distractions, not disruptions. Simply what's happening around us as we sit. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. We'll start with gently guiding the attention and focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply going to continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. And as the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Lost in thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgment. Keeping the mind alert, aware of each sound, each thought, each physical sensation, concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, just sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle, know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awaken. He was a human being no different than any one of us who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where we come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's what we get. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. For most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that happens throughout your day. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, and focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun, but it's free. Sitting, breathing, becoming aware of what you think and say and do is really the heart of this practice. Meditation is not an escape, as often people think it is. Similar to what I was mentioning earlier about maybe avoiding people, meditation is really the opposite of avoiding oneself and really looking at direct perception into oneself. What do we think? What do we say? What do we do? It's not pretending things are perfect and okay. It's being very real with our own actions. I've always seen Buddhist practice as simply a mirror for reflecting back on what we do. And this is why it's difficult, because we have spent much of our lives and spend much of our days pointing fingers at everybody else and how they're wrong and why they're wrong and what they did wrong and why we don't like them and how our views are better than theirs. I haven't talked about this in a while, but it came up in an interview I did the other day about Buddhist arrogance. It's something I used to talk about a lot, and something I went through early on when I started to study and practice Buddhism. Is I automatically just magically felt that I was better than people because I was studying or practicing Buddhism, as if I had some like pure bubble around me. At least that's what I thought. And so all the people that I was hanging out with before and doing the things I was doing with before, all of a sudden I just thought I was better than them. Excuse me. And that went on for about 2 years. You know, the more and more I studied and practiced, the more and more I thought I was just a better person than they were. And the people I was doing all these things with, all of a sudden in my mind, were not as good as I was, because they weren't as kind or weren't as generous or weren't as giving, caring or whatever it might be. I just thought I was better than they were. And then after a couple of years, I realized that was the most or least Buddhist thing I could do. That just because one explores Buddhism and talks about kindness and compassion and others treat people like crap doesn't make us better than them. And we have to be very careful with this, because to think you're better than somebody would really defeat the entire purpose of what the Buddha was talking about. First and foremost, he said there is no inherent self. So if there is no self, how can your self be better than someone else's self? I mean, that's ridiculous. But even on a very practical, fundamental level, for those who might be new to Buddhism, we really have no right to think we're better than anybody else. Even if we are kind to every person we meet all day long, and someone else is mean to every person they meet all day long, that still doesn't make us better than they are. We're all human. We all act in different ways. So this Buddhist arrogance is something that I really suggest we all check ourselves on and remind ourselves of, that just because we spend 6 months reading Pema Chodron or the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh, doesn't mean we need to show up at the holidays and tell everyone how great we are. So I'll kind of leave it at that. Just wanted to ramble on that a little bit since it popped into my head. But for those who are new, welcome. I always like to use the rest of the time remaining to just open up to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything that's sitting with you right now. There's a chat box there, as you can probably see, so feel free to just type in a question and I'll go ahead and respond. So if you are new, there are no inappropriate or no questions that shouldn't be asked. So just feel free to ask away, and we'll go from there. Thoughts, questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. Yay, no more questions. Everyone's got it all figured out. Makes it easy. Can you give me some thoughts on emptiness? Oh, Mario. And didn't I tell you to stop reading? Maybe that was somebody else. You're reading too much. Well, Brian's is a simple one. We'll get to that first. No, everything for Dharma Bum Temple is closed, including any outreach program. So we're not doing anything that brings groups of people together. So unfortunately, everything, Thanksgiving food distribution was canceled, and same thing for all holidays. Just we're not doing anything that brings people together. I'm just giving Mario some time to settle with my initial response. I'm glad you're reading, Mario. Lyndon Bryan, can you explain the concept of nirvana? So let me jump into emptiness a little bit here and then go to nirvana. So the Buddha praised Subhuti, one of his wisest disciples. He had asked Subhuti to give a discourse on emptiness, and Subhuti said nothing. And the Buddha praised him and said, "Great job." So anytime anyone asks about emptiness or I respond to anything about emptiness, I want people to understand that story, that the great understanding of emptiness was explained by Subhuti saying nothing. And in that silence and in that moment, everything was understood. Now, as we speak and talk and ponder and try to get intellectual about what emptiness is, we move further and further away from what it actually is. It's like, Mario, if I asked you to describe what pizza tastes like, you can't tell me what it tastes like and have that be the truth. You can only tell me your experience of what it tastes like. And so the only way for me to understand what pizza tastes like would be to take a bite of myself. And I look at emptiness in many ways the same way, that first and foremost, for those who have never really touched on Buddhism or read anything about emptiness, emptiness is not nothing. Often people read emptiness and think that it means nothing, and it's actually the opposite of that. Emptiness is everything. Everything is empty. And with everything being empty, everything is possible. We think of a teacup, for example, and we think we have the outside of the cup and that's the cup. But the emptiness inside it is what makes everything possible. If inside the teacup was concrete, you wouldn't be able to pour your tea into it. So the emptiness of the teacup is what allows the tea to actually exist. Emptiness makes everything possible. Emptiness is understanding to me that any ideas, any constructs, any beliefs that we have about something is simply that. It's a construct, it's a belief, it's an idea. And I believe the Buddha was really getting to understanding what is it like to take that bite of the pizza and experience it. And I guess looking back at your question, I read if there was no emptiness, nothing would come into being. That's really similar to my description of the teacup, that emptiness is what makes everything possible. And again, especially for new people, there's that mistake, confusion that people think empty means nothing. And it's not nothing, it's everything. Everything is empty. There's a teaching on the Heart Sutra, or the Heart Sutra teaching. And there's a line in there that says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is precisely emptiness, emptiness precisely form. For a lot of you who've been to the Dharma Bum Temple, when you walk in, you're facing the shrine. Back on the right, there's a Chinese calligraphy script up on the wall there. It's maybe a 2x3 frame. And what it says, if you read on the bottom, it says, form is precisely emptiness, emptiness precisely form. So what we begin to understand is that form and emptiness, there's no separation between the two. And they rely upon each other for everything to exist. So, but I want to make it very clear for everybody that if we think that we read emptiness and we have an intellectual debate on emptiness, emptiness is not meant to be, I believe, understood intellectually. Again, it's meant to be experienced. So for me, it's always not about answering questions. And that's what my master used to say. She used to say, Jeff, don't look for answers, change your questions. Meaning that as I began to have a deeper understanding, at least so I thought, of what the Buddha was teaching, my questions would change. Instead of looking at what does emptiness mean, I began to look at how does emptiness play out in my life. And very simply, if I'm fortunate enough to wake up tomorrow morning, I can do anything in the world that I want. Anything. There's nothing that I cannot do tomorrow if I wake up. And that's beautiful. So hopefully that's helpful. Brian answered that question, explain the concept of nirvana. So first, I think it's important to understand that nirvana, the word nirvana literally means to extinguish. And so we have the great rock band Nirvana. I always say that. But nirvana means to extinguish. And It's as if you've had a flame and you blow out the candle. Where did the flame go? Right? That is nirvana. It was extinguished. So they say when the Buddha died, that he entered into parinirvana, which means nirvana with no remainder, which is really beyond karmic, the cycle of karma. That our karma, which is what keeps us being reborn, he was able to neutralize the karma. So he was beyond the karmic, the generation of karma, and therefore extinguished into a state of nirvana. I like to look at nirvana as being the, often they say the opposites of nirvana is samsara, and samsara being the endless cycle of rebirth, nirvana being to extinguish the freedom, liberation from the cycle of rebirth. But I think important to understand, for me, very much like my emptiness response, that the nirvana and samsara are not, I feel, I don't find it helpful to look at them as places that we go to, right? So, you could read, well, the Buddha died and entered nirvana. So, well, where is that then, right? It makes it sound like it's a place. But it's not a place. Because if something's extinguished, where does it go? So I look at samsara and nirvana existing right here, right now, that in this moment I can experience samsara, this endless cycle of rebirth and suffering. And in this moment I can experience nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. Often people who might be new to Buddhism look at nirvana as like this goal that we're trying to get to nirvana, that it's, this freeway exit that we need to get to. And for me, it's about recognizing what keeps us from abiding in nirvana. And that's our greed, our anger, our ignorance. That's our pride, cravings, desires, all of these things. If you've never come across it or seen it, just Google 12 links of dependent origination. And you'll see the law of causation and the cycle of what starts with birth, ends with death, and everything in between. And it's what keeps us on the cycle of rebirth. Nirvana, which is in very technical Buddhist terms, you look at the Four Noble Truths. First one being suffering, the second one being the cause of suffering, greed, anger, ignorance, and the third one being the ending of suffering, liberation, or nirvana. So nirvana really is the third noble truth. It's the ending, cessation of suffering. But how do we end that suffering? How do we have that cessation? And that is the fourth noble truth, which is to practice the Eightfold Path. Correct views and thoughts and speech and action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration, these practices we always talk about. This is what gets us to abiding in nirvana, living in, or to be free from suffering. So the challenge is to, as I said earlier, to try not to see this as a goal that somewhere we're trying to get to, but see what's stopping us from being there, abiding in that place. Because if we know what our suffering is and what's causing our suffering, and we do that less, we are closer to abiding in a place of nirvana. So, but in a very simple way, or I guess just in brief, to describe where nirvana is about the same thing as trying to describe where emptiness is or what it is. So I hope that's helpful. Let's see. Human Dignity Foundation and Imperial Court are doing a share the warmth for the homeless, collecting socks, beanies, and scarves. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Dre. And I just shared something on that on my Facebook the other day, and I know Dre has that as well. So there are a lot of groups and places out there that are doing stuff. For us, we've just chosen to not do anything that would bring people together as a religious organization, which we are. So, yes, made possible by emptiness. Thank you. That was helpful. I also want some pizza. Yes, my pleasure. I'm a big pizza fan, Mario. So anytime I have a chance to use a pizza metaphor, I'm all over it. And I get to like feel the salvation. Salvation. How would you say that? Salivate, right? To salivate. Salivating over something. Is that right? This is where I wish I was with you all, because I have to wait for somebody to type. But yes, I began salivating as I thought of pizza, like Pavlov's dogs. Thank you. I don't want to ask. I'm sitting in the emptiness. Glad to hear it, Lisa. In your view, is Buddhism a religion, a philosophy, a way of life, or a science of the mind? Asking for a friend. All right, I'll close on this. Linda Bryan, thank you. You're welcome. At least sometimes I get tired of practicing, even though I know and do hurt more when I slack. Any thoughts? Yes, keep going. So, salivating for salvation. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. When I said salvation, I was like, that didn't sound right. All right, so let me go back to the question from Roel on that, and I'll close with this thought. But back to that real quick, Lisa. I get it. You get tired of it. It's tiring to try to be nice to people all day long. It's exhausting to try to be kind and generous and forgiving and compassionate. It is absolutely exhausting. But you just continue to strive on with diligence. That's the Buddha's last thing he said, strive on with diligence. Because it's a benefit to you and everybody else. So the only thoughts I have on it are don't quit, don't give up, keep showing up, whether it's here or anywhere else. Because however you suffer now, I promise you, if you stop practicing, you're going to suffer worse. All right, so Buddhism, a religion, a philosophy, a way of life, or a science of the mind? All of the above. This question really depends on, it's always one of my favorite questions, but it always depends on who you ask. Now, I'll put it to you this way. Couple things. One, the Dalai Lama, someone asked him if this country, United States, needed more Buddhists, and he said the world has enough Buddhists. This country just needs more people that are peaceful and happy, right? The way it is practiced typically in the West, US, Europe, Canada, within the lay tradition, even being taught by, say, monastics to lay people, it's not really practiced for the most part as a religious way. Right. I mean, if I look at the Dharma Bum Temple and we see 700-800 people a week, and I ask you how many of you are Buddhists or religious Buddhists, you're going to see about 3 hands. So for us, the Dharma Bum Temple was actually started because we wanted to introduce the way of life, the way of teachings of the Buddha, which had nothing to do with religious side of things. So it very much is a philosophy and a way of life. Now, what I want to also shed light on is, if you went to Thailand, if you go to Taiwan, if you go to Japan, if you go to, Tibet, Nepal regions, places like that, and you go in there and you say, this stuff isn't a religion, it's a philosophy and a way of life. It's, to me, I think it's kind of insulting, right? It would be like someone walking into a Catholic church here and saying, this isn't religion, it's a way of life. So all over the world for 2,500 years, Buddhism is and has been a very devout religious practice. Just because we in the West don't use it that way doesn't mean it's not a religion. We may justify in our own minds, and I find this constantly with people. So if you think most people who come into Buddhism in the West were not raised Buddhist. They were raised Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, pagan, whatever it is. They were raised with some other religion, and many of those people are actually turned off by religion. So they come across this Buddhist thing and they're like, oh, this is great. It's a philosophy, a way of life. It's not religion. So I'm all into it. Or people say, well, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. Like, say whatever you want, call it whatever you want. Buddhism is a 2,500-year-old religion. It is practiced philosophically every day by many people all over the world. And it's seen as a way of life, especially in the West. And it's also the last part of a science of the mind. I think Buddhism absolutely is describing the way the mind works in very detail, in great detail. So I think it's all of the above. It just, again, it depends on who you ask and where you ask it. I think it's important to respect the religious history of it and the traditions of it. To me, those are very important, even though it's not what we typically share at the Dharma Bum Temple. But I have my own personal religious rituals and practices that I do that are important to me because that's how I learned it. It's not how I share it, but it meant something to me. But if I had you all bowing and chanting and putting on robes and doing all those things don't mean anything to you. So it doesn't have that same feeling. So religion, philosophy, way of life, and science of the mind, all of the above. So hopefully that's helpful. I think it's also important to understand that the way we, if you look at a dictionary, we define Buddhism as a belief in a higher power, or we define religion as a belief in a higher power, and Buddhism doesn't have that. Buddhism doesn't have that belief in a higher power. So by that definition, Buddhism is not a religion. But like I said, go to Buddhist countries and it's 100% religious practice. So, and for many people who've never been to a cultural Buddhist temples, when hopefully soon this pandemic is behind us and we can start going back to places, and you go into these, a Thai or a Lao or Cambodian or Vietnamese or Japanese or Korean or Taiwanese Buddhist temple, you go into these places and you see the bowing and the chanting, the robes and the rituals, it'll look no different than going to a Catholic church. I mean, it'll physically look different, but as far as the rituals, you'll see just as many. So, all right. You tell your friend you're welcome. Spiritual psychology. Again, we all will call whatever it is to you, I think is what's most important, however you use it. It's a spiritual practice. It's a psychological practice. It's a philosophical practice. However we use it is great. And then for us to not attach to that definition of it, because we understand, like I'll hear people, for example, argue with people and say, well, it's not a religion. Well, that's not true. I've heard people at Dharma Bum Temple, for example, are, debating, arguing, one person trying to convince another that it's not a religion just because they don't use it that way. And so I think it's important to understand that, define how we use it, which is beautiful, and then appreciate the way that it exists around the world. So however you define it is great. Just use it, practice it, and you'll probably be a little bit healthier. So, all right, so we'll close on that and we'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. So just a quick announcement. Thanks all for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma Bum. We opened up the Dharma Bum Temple 14 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to local folks. Those of us who lead, we're not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus or masters or anything like that. We're just practitioners. We're not looking for students. We just share our understanding of Buddhist teachings with those who show up. So every night, we've been closed 9 months now. March 12th, we closed. Obviously, it's not been fun being closed, but we felt it was the safest, wisest thing to do for the community. Everyone's at risk, and we tend to have a lot of high-risk folks. So staying closed is still the best option for us all. But everything is online. About 90% of our classes, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, are on YouTube. Everything else is on Zoom. If you go to the dharmabums.org website, you'll see the schedule there. A lot of recovery classes, our teen classes, our college classes. The family sangha is on hold. It'll pick up again after the new year. Every Monday through Friday morning we sit. So thanks for being here. Please be safe, stay home, wear a mask, and let's just be reminded of that Buddhist arrogance and keep our own practice to our own humble selves. So thank you all. Be safe.